I'm Philip Curry and today we are making chocolate fudge cake. This is a classic cake. Now you can make it in either 2 layers or 4 layers. You can make one big fat single layer. It's totally up to you, but we have a really simple chocolate fudge cake. We have a really simple chocolate ganache. This makes a perfect birthday cake. It is inspired directly by the ones that I enjoyed as a kid. Anyway, let's make it. For the sponge, we need to just preheat the oven to 180 degrees. We need to line our tins, so I'm popping out, I'm using springform because I love them. Lining the base and not doing anything for the sides. So we're adding our brown sugar, the water, olive oil, vanilla paste, apple cider vinegar. And then we're just whisking these together until we get essentially a syrup. So you can use a hand blender to do this in a few seconds, but I'm just going to whisk them. So we just want to keep whisking this until the oil no longer looks like it's sitting on top, but it's actually been drawn into the mixture, and it will do that. We're using a lot less fat in this recipe than we would in a recipe with a similar texture. So I'm just setting that aside, and then into another bowl we have plain flour, baking powder, and bicarbonate soda, salt, and of course can't forget the cocoa powder. Our leavening agents are in a specific ratio, and we have a little bit of vinegar that's going to activate the bicarbonate soda and give our batter a little pre-rise before we start baking it, and then the baking powder will activate and continue rising. So we're just going to whisk all of our dry ingredients together, just distribute the baking powder, the cocoa powder, and this is also a bit of a sifting or sieving replacement. I always say if you have to sieve lumps out of your flour, it means that it hasn't been stored properly, that maybe it's been affected by moisture. So then we're just going to add in all of our liquids, including this. And then we're just going to gently stir this batter together. We don't need a mixer. Now, you can eyeball this, but I like to use scales for everything. So I'm going to weigh 600 grams into my tin. So we have split our batter between the 2 tins, and I'm going to show you something that I swear by, and that is baking strips. These are basically fabric strips that we wrap around our tin, and we soak them in water, and this just creates a nice layer of insulation that gives us an even bake. And this is really important when we have like layered cakes and we want nice even layers. And this just helps us get a nice even rise across the sides, stopping the outside from setting in while the middle of the cake still needs to rise, resulting in a big dome. So this just gets us a nice even rise across the whole cake. And then we just pull them around the cake. It's nice to snug around the base of the tin. Doing the same for both tins. There we go. So we've got 2 nicely insulated tin. That's going to give us a nice even rise for perfect layering. You'll see in the oven I have one tray in the bottom third and the other one in the top. This way we have enough even space, with enough space in between for heat to circulate. You'll see they're kind of positioned with equal amounts of space in the top and bottom. While our cake is baking, we can prepare the ganache. Now, it's important to note that the ganache does take about 4 to 6 hours to set. You can speed this up by putting it in the fridge, but you don't want to use it out of the fridge. It needs to be at room temperature for at least 1 hour. Maybe it's best to prepare the ganache the night before and leave it at room temperature. So to do that, we're going to bring some milk and the sugar to a simmer. And then we have half the milk that is cold. And the idea is that this amount of the milk is enough to melt the chocolate. The other half is cold, and this allows us to cool down this mixture quickly and more consistently with a great texture. So the first time our ganache has a beautiful thick texture, and this is going to set quite hard if we had this amount of milk, so we actually add quite a bit more. And then once that is beautifully blended and we have a nice glossy mixture that feels cool to the touch, meaning it will crystallize faster, we can then pour our mixture into a tray like this. Now this, I always recommend when we want to cool something down quickly that we pour it into a wide, shallow tray to make sure that we are increasing the surface area. It's always also important just to put a layer of plastic wrap on the surface, and this just stops it from forming a skin, keeps our texture really nice. Now I'm going to leave this in the fridge for 1 hour and then I'm going to take it out. Now when our cakes have fully cooled, so we can remove our strips, which are now dry, but you'll see that we have a really nice even bake across the top. It's not kind of a massive dome. Even though we have a little cracking, it's nice and flat. So for me, that is perfect. Don't need to trim it, which is great. We don't need to waste any cake. And I'm just going to run my knife around the edges just to make sure it's free from the tin. It's up to you how confident you feel slicing a cake in half. I'll show you how. In case this will just make an awesome 2-layer cake, but I'm gonna make 4 layers. So just now, my trick is to always measure up roughly the distance that you want to cut, and then use your fingers here as a guide, and then start rotating your knife around the cake. And each time you are going a little bit deeper, and it's used the cut that you previously made as the guide for where to cut. So I'm just going to put on top and just flip this over to release. And then I've got my 2 lovely, super moist rounds of chocolate fudge cake ready. And then I'm going to do that to the same thing to the other cake. Now, I'm going to use a cake turntable, but if you didn't have a cake turntable, you can do all of this on a plate. You just won't get the flawless finish. Now, just wet a piece of paper towel, and this is just going to hold my base in place so it doesn't move around. Now you will want to remember not to forget your ganache in the fridge, or it will be too hard to use for nice masking. It does need to have quite a soft texture, which you only get from having it at room temperature. So today you get to benefit from seeing my mistake. I've left this in the fridge for about an hour and 20 minutes, which is too long, and it does go too firm. Now, if your ganache has set in the fridge, I would recommend you just leave it at room temperature for an hour to really soften up, and then just use a wooden spoon or something firm to just give it a nice mix until it's super smooth and evenly textured. So I'm going to use a piping bag to help spread the ganache. I just find it a bit easier. I have a bit more control over the thickness and structure of the cake. Then I'll use a palette knife and just spread that nice and evenly. Before then laying on my next layer. You see, I've used a piece of paper to just help guide it, and we want to make sure that it is perfectly aligned. I'll just use my piping bag again. And then we start on the top of the cake and get a nice even layer all the way across. And then I'm just going to work the sides, any leftover ganache on the sides in to get what we call a crumb coat, and this is just going to capture any loose crumbs before we start, kind of giving our cake its final sexy coat of ganache. So now we're ready. I'm going to just pipe ganache all the way around. And this is a fun way of getting ganache onto a cake. And then I'm just going to spread it as much as I can in a nice kind of even way, getting it up the cake. And you'll see now I always, before starting up the sides, I'm going to do a quick masking just to make sure we have a nice even layer. But then it's critically important that we always have ganache right up to the corner. So I find it very useful to kind of do the top layer, do the spreading of the top so that it overhangs slightly, just like that. And then working my way around to make sure that there's enough ganache on that top corner, like here is missing some, so that when we go to do our finishing spreading of the ganache, we have enough for a beautiful finish. So just I'm going to pull out my big knife. Go. Lovely top. We've got ganache hanging, overhanging on the side. And then we're just finishing now, making sure that the spatula is being held completely vertically. There we go. I love this kind of natural ripple along the edge, so I'm going to leave that. But if you wanted to, you would just take a kind of a clean palette knife and then just bring those edges in. You can garnish this cake with chocolate dripping, some extra cake around the top. It's completely up to you, but I love it just plain and simple because this is that kind of iconic chocolate fudge cake. So there we go. It looks elegant, it looks simple, but it's also wickedly indulgent down to the core. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.